Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans around the world. Some updates first at the front of the show. You may notice if you are subscribed to the channel or if you are just browsing or you get recommended, you may notice that there are some videos showing up referring to events that happened in the past. This is because I'm consolidating the podcast and going all in on YouTube. So many of these were already recorded as audio episodes on a different platform. I'm then moving them to YouTube so that everybody gets to take advantage of the content. So you see how rich the content has been. Of course, the audio quality is nowhere near back then what it is now. I've been investing a lot of time and money into the way the podcast works, generally speaking. And then also, as in response to some questions that I did get, the reason that I don't do video is there's two reasons for this. One, you don't really care what the heck I look like. Number one, let's be honest, and that's okay. I acknowledge this. You care about the content, and some of you may be just putting it on play and sticking it in your pocket and working out or doing something else. So to me, it made better sense just to do this kind of a platform. And the only reason it's on YouTube is because a lot of boxing fans are on YouTube, browsing around and listening to different platforms like Barbershop and others. Mine was to be an alternative to those platforms so that you had some choice. You might not want a platform that specifically leans towards a certain group of fighters or a certain race of fighters or a certain gender of fighters. You want somebody that speaks like a boxing fan as if you were talking to them in the room with somebody else who happened to be a fan of the sport of boxing. That's how I wanted to be presented. So a lot of the content that I recorded in the past is that, but it never made it to YouTube because I put YouTube later. So if you do see episodes show up and they're referencing older events, that's why. They're migrated episodes, but YouTube does not allow me to indicate to you. It has a little flag that says originally recorded on da da da, but the date of posting will be recent. It doesn't mean I recorded it recently. It just means I moved it recently. So I pulled the list. There's like 8 or 10 episodes or some odd that I have to prep, get an image for, and then move over to the YouTube platform. So I'll be doing that over time. And then I'll just keep it as a normal cadence. Additionally, and you can use this because, like I said, our site is cryptotalkradio.net. When you go there, the For the Love of Boxing is near the bottom for hitting that. But at the top, we have a contact form. If you have any feedback, suggestions, comments, or questions, you can leave the comment on the episode down below on YouTube, or you can submit that form. We'd like it if you would like and subscribe these. If you think it's great content, you think it's worth listening to. And as well, if there's interest in a true podcast, meaning you can add it to your podcast platform or to your iTunes on your Apple or Google Play Music. If there's interest in a true podcast platform presence, in addition to what we're doing on YouTube, so that you can listen to it kind of on the go, like in your car or something, and the YouTube is clunky for you to do it, but you only care about the audio, let us know. I'm happy to do it, but I need to gauge interest because I see there's a lot of interest in the content. I don't know if there's interest in a true podcast, or should I just keep doing it the way I'm doing it? Let's get into our weekend of boxing. So far, what I know is that there's one fight that's happening tomorrow that's on Showtime. I'm pretty sure it's pay-per-view because of who's in it. That's Mr. Gary Russell Jr. fighting Mark Magsayo. And the problem I already see, this one is a weird fight because Russell came in slightly overweight when they did the weigh-in, and usually when fighters come in overweight, it ends in some sort of an upset. We've seen time and time again this happen, and it means that it doesn't mean that they're not diligent in the gym. It means that something has happened where they're not able to get the weight off as easily as possible. His father had some issues with type 2 diabetes, and so that's been a distraction for him. He talked about an injury, his hand injury, and he said that he's been injured in pretty much every fight he's went into. So he's got a lot of things going, and things are kind of stacking up. And I think age is playing a factor, but I also think inactivity is playing another factor, and it's harder for him to focus enough to get to where he needed to be. So he looks good as far as physically, he looks okay, but as I look in his eyes, there's something that's, to me, not quite right, where it doesn't look like he's fully in the fight. So as of what we know, things are not looking good, and he might be getting upset by Mark Magsayo. Mark Magsayo is a hard hitter. He's not a boxer. He's a hard hitter. He's not going to take too many risks. And Russell's very good at keeping you away from him. Russell's also very good at accuracy. He's a sharpshooter. He's very accurate. He knows how to put his punches together. He knows how to do combos when they make sense. But Russell does tend to make mistakes, and he does tend to get clipped on occasion when he's not as active as he needs to be. Now, Russell's come out and said, I'm going to try to fight 3 times this year if possible, because I'm going to try to step it up. I know I'm getting close to the end of my career. I know I'm getting older, and I got to do something. My gut tells me there's an upset today, or tomorrow in this case. My gut tells me there's going to be an upset. My gut tells me that Magsayo is going to pull it out. I suspect, I don't know this, I don't think that Magsayo is going to have enough to knock out or stop Gary Russell. My suspicion is it's going to be a decision similar to Teofimo versus CM Punk Kambosos, same type of thing. That's my gut speaking. I might be way off. Or we see a decision that nobody agrees with from the judges where it was obvious that Magsayo should have won and he doesn't get his hand raised. That's 2. That's the second potential I see. Or something is so wrong with Russell that he gets clipped and he gets stopped, but he's still healthy, still on his feet, still fighting. He just gets clipped and stopped. That one seems unlikely to me, just from what I know of Russell. I get the sense that something's not quite all there for this fight. We'll have to see how that goes. Subriel Matias is fighting, I believe, also on the undercard. He's fighting Petros Anyan, and I don't know either guy. This is the welterweight division, allegedly. Although they're fighting at a lesser than the 147. So they're on the lighter side. They're coming in at junior welterweight weights, but they're apparently fighting at the welterweight division. I don't know if that's because I don't know why. If there was some sort of weight condition or something, or could be that the report's wrong and it's truly junior welterweight. Because the thing is, they're over the junior welterweight limit as of right now. And it might be somewhat difficult for them to make weight this late game. So it would have to be at 147 catch weight. But as far as I know, neither guy has fought at welterweight. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name correctly, so I'll probably get it wrong. But Tuksat Nambar and Ulaanbaatar, I don't know, from Ulaanbaatar, sorry. And Sakaria Lucas. Don't know either guy, never heard of him. That's coming at junior lightweight division. So these guys are right around where Shakur Stevenson is. Nyambar, I know he fought a little while ago, and I remember the fight, and it ended decent, but I don't know enough. I didn't do any research on either guy. I'm purposely not doing that for this event because none of these guys are going to move the needle in the divisions that they're fighting, with the possible exception of Magsayo if he's able to upset Gary Russell. Because if he upsets Gary Russell, his door is open, I guarantee you, in the 126 weight division. I guarantee you that's going to happen. He's going to get noticed big time because Russell is kind of perceived. First of all, he's the longest reigning champion, male champion that I think is in the business right now. So that's one accolade that this guy would have taken from Russell. Also, you'd be the only second person to have beaten Russell, the other person being, of course, Lomachenko. So I think there's a strong notoriety. Now, of course, the bookies say that Russell's going to take this pretty easily, but it used to be wider odds. It used to be that they thought they were going to dominate. He was going to dominate Magsayo, but then Russell went on the DAZN Boxing Show podcast, and he's admitting all these things. My hands hurt, and my dad with what's going on with his foot, and and now this situation of missing weight, the odds are starting to get a little bit closer. And usually, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a guarantee, but it reminds me of Thurman Pacquiao, actually. Prior to Thurman Pacquiao, there was all this chatter. First, nobody believed that Thurman was going to lose that fight. I'm being honest with you. Nobody thought Thurman was going to take a loss because Thurman was fresh. He was young. He was undefeated. He had beaten the likes of Sean Porter and Danny Garcia. He was there. He was game. And then all of a sudden, he meets Osasito, and he has one round where he just doesn't show up. He later would admit, and I'll talk about this in a second, that something just wasn't right. And he didn't want to throw back, and he didn't know why. But we still, Pacquiao felt like he was on a slide. We didn't know what was going on. Broner took 4 rounds off the dude, and that meant that if Broner's able to take 4 rounds off Pacquiao, and Broner's barely trying, then Thurman certainly has to be able to beat this dude. We get in there, Thurman's going backwards against Pacquiao, and I don't know why he was doing that, and then gets caught, dropped. He, in his own admission, said he was then fighting for a draw. He felt like he was losing. He wasn't going to be able to convince the judges, and he's fighting for a draw. And so he didn't step up like he needed to. He said it himself. I'm not making this up. You can go find the footage. So now this situation here is a very similar situation in the sense that Magsayo, Russell should easily be able to beat him because Magsayo is not from a skill to skill perspective, just straight skills. Magsayo is to Gary Russell what Chino Maidana was to Amir Khan. Like, it should not be anywhere close in the decision if it goes to decision. And Russell should easily take care of him. But all these factors that are building up, the missing of weight, situation with his dad, his hand injury, the long layoff, his general frustration with his career, all these things have to be playing a factor. And it makes me think there's a chance for an upset. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. But Russell's planning for the future. He's planning to say, I want to fight 3 times. I want to get to the point where, I'm doing more and getting more titles and possibly moving up and doing other stuff and getting back in the mix like I used to be. Floyd Money Mayweather, Las Vegas native he is. Apparently he's been working on creating a NASCAR racing team, Money Team Racing. They put up a page a while ago, and this was in the chatter, and they're saying, okay, maybe we'll do this, maybe we won't, maybe we'll do this, maybe we won't. He's not new to it. Many people have NASCAR teams. That just seems to be their thing when they're car fans. And of course, when there's always been this joke, right, that NASCAR is where you find the so-called white fans. And so there's always been this theory that by getting into NASCAR, you are increasing your exposure outside of your core element. But it never panned out. This has been going on for years. It never panned out. But apparently, they're going to be coming up on this Daytona 500 coming up on February 20th next month. And they'll debut as the Money Team Racing, and they'll be able to get it going. It's not finalized yet. This is in the works to happen. And you're wondering, well, why does that have anything to do with boxing? Well, think about it this way. Anytime that you're increasing exposure by way of a boxing savant like Floyd Mayweather or anybody else, you're increasing eyes on the sport potentially because you're saying we're still here, we're still doing a thing. And the brand, the Money Team brand, is kind of all over the place. He's got a lot of brand recognition that I think lends itself to increased awareness of the product. His core product is still boxing. He still does a little bit of training. He still has his gyms. He still has Girl Collection. And so he's creating this brand. So he's doing it smart. I don't know if he'll be successful here, but this is what he's working on. And we'll have to see how this all plays out. Because part of the problem with NASCAR that has been the theory is that NASCAR has also gone a little bit stale, not losing fans like permanent, but just, it's kind of like the NFL. Their tastes are changing, and some of the stuff has kind of been distasteful to them. And you can take Mayweather's audience and possibly add them to the NASCAR side because they're going to dial in to see the Money Team Racing potentially. That's the thought process. So watch out for that one. Anthony Joshua came out and said, I'm still here. I'm going to keep on fighting, and I'm going to be a champion again. This is, of course, referring to the rematch with Alexander Usyk that is still in the plans to happen, regardless of Lennox Lewis claiming that he knows that Joshua's going to take step-aside money. He says that, no, I exercise the immediate rematch clause. I'm going to be a 3-time champion. Now, the question here is, we don't know what Joshua's going to show up. We know what Usyk's going to show up because he's the same Usyk he's always been, but we don't know what Joshua's going to show up. Mayweather's made a point because some commentators say this was a huge upset when Usyk beat Joshua, and Mayweather's like, no, it's not an upset at all. It's an upset to you because you're casual and you don't understand the boxing business and how it works. The reason it was not an upset, and the reason we could say it was not an upset, is because Usyk is a decorated Olympian. So we only look at the pro, and we only look at his fights as a pro, and we only look at fights like with Chisora, and we say, okay, this guy must not be all that good, or his size, where there's guys like Canelo who are stopping guys larger than him, and we dismiss the Olympic pedigree as kind of Mayweather's point. To counter what he said, I agree with him, but to counter what he said, part of the reason that some Olympians are kind of disregarded is that not every Olympian is able to step up to that same plate and knock it out the park like we would expect them to. Sometimes those Olympians just don't show up. Sometimes you have Olympians like a Deontay Wilder, who I believe he only hit bronze, but yet he's able to have that streak of 40 some odd wins and he was wobbled a couple of times, but he's able to make it work. Then you got somebody like Jeff Horn, who went to the Olympics as well, and by and large, he's not nearly as successful until he hits Manny, beats Manny, and then and beats Mundine. So I don't think that it's consistent that being an Olympian is going to resort to consistent success against every opponent. I think that's the point that the reporter was making was it felt like an upset because Joshua was coming off a win, which is the rematch against Ruiz. And yes, he ran. The only reason that I think he lost is because for whatever reason, he felt like he wanted to box Usyk, which was a stupid mistake. So if we look at it in terms of fight strategy, yes, it was an upset because we didn't expect Joshua to fight like that when Joshua has always essentially been a brawler. And I say brawler not to denigrate him. I'm saying because it's true. He has always been a come forward, try to get you out of there, but he's still cautious. He's still defensive, try to counter you, try to hit that long jab on you. He's always been a kind of a come forward, never the box on the back foot and try to outstrike you and do all this because that didn't make any sense for his frame. He's too dang big for that. So I think that was the point they were trying to make is the fight strategy was a bit of an upset because we didn't expect to see Joshua get what he got, which was almost stopped in the final parts of the round. Whether or not he beats Usyk again, I don't think he does, to be honest with you, because I think Usyk is too much from an intelligence perspective for Anthony Joshua. That's my opinion. If it were up to me and I were booking the fights, I would have booked Wilder Joshua right now because to me, that's the money fight to still have for both guys to decide who's going to stay in the business and who needs to get out. Because if Wilder was able to go in there against Joshua and spark him flat, okay, Joshua could say, okay, it's time for me to retire. I don't really have this. I need to get out of it. Maybe help some young and up-and-coming fighters. Wilder might have then a chance and an opportunity to get against Usyk. Now, that's a compelling fight because Usyk is going to be stylistically superior to Deontay Wilder, but does he have the power like a Tyson Fury did to keep Wilder off of him long enough to avoid that right hand? To me, that's a compelling match we're probably never going to see. Amir Khan. Amir Khan is still talking about their fight and building their fight. He thinks he's going to stop Kell Brook. I question that's going to happen because I think that Kell Brook is going to have too much from the timing side. We'll have to wait and see what the deal is with that one. The guy I call Bumlanga, Edgar Berlanga, who's, like NSB and other places. They love this guy because he's an eye test fighter and he looks like whatever the hell. And he's fighting Steve Rolls. And if you don't remember, or you're like, who? Steve Rolls is the guy that Golovkin got criticism for because he fought Steve Rolls when he was coming back up as his kind of get back fight after losing to Canelo. And Steve Rolls is not a terrible fighter. He's certainly not. He's just not. I would say he's probably C level. He's not a terrible fighter, but at the same time, it seems like he struggles with power fighters. So we'll have to see. Golovkin was his first loss, but he's never. He's older. He's never really had any sort of step up fight. This is a step down fight to me, if you ask me, because Rolls is coming off a 2-fight win, as I understand it. And because he's coming off a 2-fight win, I consider him the A side in this one, but yet the boxing community considers Bumlanga as the top guy just because of eye tests and Bumlanga ain't beating nobody. All he does is look good, sparking out lesser competition. And I think he's getting too much hype over the Caceres win, is my opinion. I don't see what everybody else sees about Bumlanga, in my opinion. Is he a talented fighter? Sure, but there's a lot of talented fighters. I just don't rate Bumlanga until I see something more. And I think Rolls is going to be a test. I think Rolls is going to do enough to help us understand if Bumlanga really is legit or if he's just a regular fighter like anybody else, like I suspect him to be. So hopefully I'm proven wrong because I'm never down on anybody. I just think let's see what the heck we're doing. Boots Ennis came out talking about, and I laughed at him, but he came out talking about he's going to win the title in 2022. Of course, this will be at welterweight. He wants to fight 3 times. Good for him if he does, but he expects to get a belt. Now, let's put it in perspective what this means, folks. In order for him to get a belt at welterweight, first of all, you got Errol Spence. He's about to fight Yordenis Ugas. You got Terrence Crawford out there, and he's having a hard time on the promotional side because he refused to sign with PBC. So he's basically a free agent, and Eddie Hearn and others have come out and said, we're not going to sign Crawford, and it's because Bob Arum already trashed Crawford on the way out the door, talking about he could build a nice house out in Beverly Hills for the money he's lost on him. Nice house. And so now Crawford's stock has dropped. He's a champion, but he doesn't have any leverage. And so he's still trying to put A-side demands on Errol Spence, who's the true A-side of the welterweight. He's still the king of the welterweight until somebody topples him. However, Spence wants to fight Ugas next because Spence was supposed to fight Pacquiao, and he couldn't fight Pacquiao because he was hurt. So then Ugas fights Pacquiao. Ugas beats Pacquiao. The next logical fight to have then is Spence and Ugas beat the man who beat the man. If we're going to go by that logic with Crawford, when he beat Jeff Horn, and that's what makes him top dog, then apparently Ugas became the man when he beat Manny Pacquiao, and this was reflected in the rings ratings. And then Spence wants to fight the man now, who is actually Jordanius Ugas, even though Ugas can't draw money to a family reunion. So I want to see Spence Ugas happen if I have my way, though. I would have rather seen Keef, Once Upon a Time Thurman, fight Ugas. I mentioned that before because I think stylistically that would have been a better, more brilliant fight, in my opinion. And it would allow Keef to get back in the mix and prove himself. But the problem is, look at who you got who have belts. Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford, Jordanius Ugas. Somebody between Spence and Ugas is going to hold all the belts. Boots Ennis, yes, I see he's a good fighter. I'm about to put a video up that I recorded a while ago. He's Adrian Broner if Adrian Broner actually cared about the boxing business. That's what I see of this dude. He's all flash and flashy punches, and he looks good, and he's doing all this stylistic stuff that's going to get him. He was eating punches the last fight I saw him. He was taking it on the chin. He had no defensive presence whatsoever. But NSB and others just like to see those flashy fighters that are out there doing the Nassim Hamed dancing and all that nonsense like Broner used to do. And so I don't see anything fundamentally that's terrible about him. I just don't think he's this legendary great fighter, just like Bumlenga. It's the same thing. I don't rate those flashy type fighters. So because I don't do that, if I look at his style right now in his last fight, Spence puts this dude to sleep, puts him to sleep, because if Spence catches him with a punch on the chin like he was eating punches in the last fight, there's no way. There's no way that he beats Spence. As far as Jordanius Ugas, maybe he beats Ugas, but I suspect that one goes to a draw like Ray Robinson, because Ugas is a very tricky fighter. He's a very fundamentally tricky fighter that can catch you with shots you didn't expect. Power's a little bit sketchy, like Sean Porter talked about of himself, and I'll talk about that in a second. But regardless, he's a very fundamentally tricky fighter, and I think that goes to a draw. I don't rate that Ennis is going to blow him out at all. And then as far as Crawford, I do think that Ennis could beat Crawford, but it depends on the intelligence factor. That's not even about skill. That's about intelligence. So I do think Ennis is going to wobble Crawford. I think he's going to give him fits all the way up to round 9. But it's that intelligence. Are you able to adjust to what's in front of you to avoid what's happening to you and clean it up? I think Crawford would do a better job of that than Ennis, and I think that Crawford would essentially, I don't think he would stop him, but I do think he would give him some problems, and I think Crawford wins that if he's able to out-intelligence him, which I think he would. So now, in the current landscape, I don't see Boots getting a title. Well, that's the span of 2022, because Crawford's already said he's not going to be able to fight in the first quarter because Spence is fighting Ugas, and Crawford doesn't want to fight anybody else. I would love to see Crawford fight Virgil Ortiz. Ortiz has a fight coming up. So that's not going to happen. Abdukakarov took a loss, so that's not going to happen. I don't know where Blair the Flair Cobbs is. I'd love to see him fight Crawford. That'd be an awesome fight, but he hasn't fought anybody to earn it. So I know that Crawford's not going to do it because he wants A-side pay. So that leaves Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman's fighting Mario Barrios. I'm still leaning Barrios in that fight. I'll talk about why here in a second, because he was Keith on the Portaway podcast. Great podcast. Make sure you check it out. And he was talking about himself and the fight and where he's at and his mentality. And they talked deep into the Porter and Keef fight, which I thought was exciting to listen to. That's why I say go listen to this. But I'm still leaning Barrios just because there's something in Keef that bothers me. It doesn't feel like he's mentally done. It feels like he's not mentally there. So meaning it doesn't feel like the same Keef, the same hunger, the same drive. It's almost like he's trying to convince himself that he's still in it, if that makes any sense. And when you're at that point, I think it's harder for you to focus and get your groove back like you used to have. This one reminds me a lot of, guys that would lead the business and then become like Winky Wright, great example. And Keef mentions him on occasion. Winky Wright, he came back and wanted to fight all the top guys, and it ultimately was harmful for him. But I think it pushed him to a level of hunger, right? Passion. But with Keef, it's more like Corey Spinks in the sense that in your mind something's wrong because he took a loss to Zab Judah. He got knocked out. And so then something was wrong. He was never the same fighter ever since then. Now, that was a knockout, but I think with Keef, it's more the persistent injuries he's had. The loss to Manny, I don't think affected him as much. I think it's more his failure to perform like he knows he should have. What happened with Josecito, which I'll talk about a little bit later, I think all these things together have started to create at least a little bit of doubt as to whether or not he can do it at the top level anymore. Because if you're doing that against the Josecito, then how can you sustain somebody like a Terrence Crawford? We can talk about what happened with Sean Porter, but that was all about intelligence. You're not going to out intelligence Terrence Crawford, I don't think, if you can't out intelligence somebody like Josecito. You know what I mean? So I felt something was weird. So then, if Boots Ennis wants to come into the division, to me that would be a good fight. Assuming Keith gets past Mario Barrios, is he willing to fight Boots Ennis first, and then the winner of that fight gets to fight Crawford next? I think that would be a good test of all these guys to know. The question is whether Keith's going to get past Mario Barrios. To me, I think Mario, I'm leaning Mario ever slightly. I'm hoping Keith pulls it out. I'm hoping Keith, like Sean said, I'm hoping Keith shows up the way he used to show up, the way he showed up against Danny, the way he showed up against Sean. Because I don't know, we do need some threat left in the division because, Spence isn't getting any younger, Crawford isn't getting any younger, or Ugas certainly isn't getting any younger. And I talked about money kicks and him fighting Floyd, and that's apparently going to go forward. And this allegedly is going to happen. Floyd came out and confirmed he's going to do the exhibition with money kicks. It's going to be on February 20th, but they're still finalizing all negotiations. So it's not done, but Floyd says it's basically, we agreed to do it. We just have to figure out the money part of it. And I don't know. I think it's a bad idea. It's good for Floyd because he's going to make a lot of money. It's freaking Dubai. But I think it's a bad idea all the way around. And, Money Kicks is not a fighter. He's a regular guy. And I think of course, it's an exhibition, but I think it's a bad idea for that. But that's going to happen is what I'm told. And we'll see what it is. The WBC president has said that the Thurman Barrios fight is going to be an eliminator, but not the final eliminator. We were talking about potentially having a final eliminator, and this came from Thurman, Keef, because Keef, I guess, was told it's an eliminator, and there was some controversy and weird stuff about the weights and weigh-ins, and it's like, well, there's no title, there's no nothing, so what are we talking about? What's going on? This is why I say I'm concerned about Keef, because we're talking about weights. If he's able to easily make 147, why the heck does it matter? Like, that's the kind of thing that I'm just not sure where his head's at, because it doesn't matter if it's entitled or okay for them to do weights or whatever the heck. I repeat it. Mario Barrios has fought at 147. He has some fights at 147. I know people keep saying his debut at 147. It's not his debut at 147. He has fought at 147. Go look at his freaking record. He fought at 147. He went down to go chase titles and then robbed Abdikakarov. So just understand, Barrios is not new to 147. I don't see this as this unfair weight advantage for Keef because I see that Barrios has had issues making weight before. He was basically draining himself down, but he has experience at 147. So let's see where that goes. Now, if this is not a final eliminator, it means that there's no guarantee that the winner is going to get Spence. It just means that we're getting, we're removing people from the equation, basically. Well, if Barrios pulls that out, it's going to totally shake up the division because the narrative is going to be that Keef took a loss to a junior welterweight. Of course, Barrios has fought at 147, but he's essentially a junior welterweight for the predominant part of his career. So that puts the pressure on Keef. And so here we are talking about weight. And why? It's like, why can't you just go out there and make the weight and not worry about it? Who cares if you do a weigh-in check? Who cares if you don't? You can make the weight, go make the weight and stop complaining about it. That's why I'm concerned about Keef. That's why I have concerns, because there's all these things he keeps asking about that's like stupid. Just go and get the job done like you used to, dude. I don't know. Anyhow, Terry Harper, Heather the Heat Hardy are going to be fighting in March 12th in Nottingham. And of course, Heather the Heat Hardy has jumped between boxing and MMA. And listen, Heather is she's a nice fighter. She's a decent fighter. She's defended titles. She's done a decent job. So I got nothing bad to say about her. We had Terry Harper. Terry Harper, if you don't remember Terry Harper, she fought a girl named Baumgardner. And in that fight, Baumgardner hit Harper with a hook. I believe it was a hook that knocked Harper out on her feet. Like, she was dead on her feet. She wasn't moving. And it was a scary thing. It was crazy. I don't think I've seen anything like it in the women's division or the men's division outside of select few opportunities. Whereas Hardy doesn't have any power. I don't want to say she's eye candy because that's not fair because she's a tough fighter, but she tends to be, what's the best analog I can think of? She goes out there and she fights her ass off every single time. She's not one that goes to take a loss. She goes and fights her ass off, but she never is going to get past that glass ceiling because she doesn't have the same power, number one. Number two, the skill of some of the other people that she's now stepping up to fight. And I believe that a lot of the push she gets is because of her looks and because of the marketing and the hype behind her, as opposed to anything fundamental. That's not to denigrate her as a fighter. It's to say that when you look at the levels of people that she's fighting now, I'm sorry, she's not in any of their classes, period. She took a loss to Amanda Serrano, who's one of the best in the business right now on the women's side. Now they're trying to do this matchup with Terry Harper, and Terry Harper is coming off this terrible, terrible loss. So then if Harper goes out there and gets blitzed out by Terry Harper, who got knocked down on her feet, it just solidifies what I'm saying. I suspect that's what happens. I suspect Harper takes her out. This is my theory. I'm not going to watch the fight because I'm concerned for both women, frankly, because they've taken some really bad ass whoopings, and I don't want to see it. Dillian White versus Tyson Fury. Of course, Dillian White has been on and off the mandatory for the WBC, now held by Tyson Fury, the Gypsy King. Now they're trying to do the purse bid. There was a deadline for the purse bid. It's been delayed a couple of times. Dillian's fighting to get his shot as best he can. Fury was trying to get a different fight. Fury was trying to get to the point where the WBC would make a ruling. The WBC made a ruling. They said Fury deserves to get 80-20 split. If we decide to do it, White's like, screw that. We need to get to like 65-45 to make it fair, because that's the normal split when you do a interim title, shot like this, and it's a mandatory. Why are you trying to screw me like this? And I partially agree with him. However, the WBC ruled in Tyson Fury's favor. And so it's gone back and forth over and over again, all because Dillian White's been the mandatory for a long time, folks. He's been the mandatory for ages. Like, at some point, it becomes non-mandatory because nobody's forcing the thing. Now, to be fair, people have said, well, Dillian's been knocked out. He's taken losses. He's not stepped up. Why does he deserve that? I don't disagree, but the point is the mandatory is the mandatory. Like, you can't keep changing the rules like they're doing. And so I believe the deadline for this now was the 26th, I believe is true, which would be next week, Wednesday, to have some decision on the purse bid to get this thing moving forward. I think Tyson Fury is still trying to push to the 80-20 split. And that's because Tyson Fury, number one, he's undefeated. Number two, he's a unified holder. Number three, he's lineal. And number four, White hasn't done anything to really deserve this. So I have no problem with the 80-20 split. I know some people are critical about it, but to me, that's what it really should be. And then my most exciting one here, and after this, we'll get into our schedule. But the most exciting news, Jesse Fricken Vargas. I don't celebrate that he caught COVID, but I celebrate that he caught COVID because it means he's out, which means that Srisaket Sorangvijay and Carlos Cuadras is now going to headline the DAZN event on February 5th, and they're moving it. It's now going to be in Phoenix. This is awesome news because I said it. If you go back to that episode, I said, I don't rate Jesse Vargas. I don't know why he keeps getting fights. He's a tough dude, but I don't think it's fair. He's getting top billing over these two guys because these two guys are going to steal the show. And some people on NSB said that nobody's going to watch it because they're small guys, deep. You're probably right, but they're cheating themselves out. They're not really fans because these guys are going to steal the show. I guarantee you, these two are going to tear the house down. You really should watch this freaking fight. And it has a decent undercard too. So it's like, you can't lose this. You cannot lose this. This is going to be a huge thing. And the fact that it's in Phoenix means you're going to get more eyes on the product physically there. I think this is an awesome thing. I love it. I love seeing it. They deserve this. They deserve this moment. And these little guys are going to show this is what boxing really should be. And I love to see that something like that happened. Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Jesse Vargas, but you didn't deserve to be top billing on this thing, dude. No, sorry. So anyway, again, on the schedule, the only thing that's happening, and this is tomorrow on Showtime at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time out in Atlantic City, like I mentioned, in the Borgata Hotel, Casino, and Spa. On tomorrow is Mr. Gary Russell Jr. versus Mark Magsayo, where I predict Mark Magsayo potentially could get an upset over Mr. Gary Russell because there seems to be a lot of things happening where Gary Russell is not able to do what he used to do as far as making weight and getting in there. And there's a lot of physical things happening with him, things in his life. And I'm greatly concerned. I'm greatly concerned for, I'm not concerned for his health in the fight. I'm concerned with what's going on with him outside of the ring. And I want to see that, he's still there and he's still able to do what he's doing. But I know there's been a significant impact on Russell. And so I hope that this is not a foreshadowing of things to come on this. Now, I'd be remiss if I don't talk about the flip on this, and that's Mark Magsayo, because I haven't dedicated any time to him because I wanted to basically give all the sense over here to Mr. Russell because he's been out, and I wanted to be fair to him. Mark Magsayo's most recent fight, as I understand it, prior to Gary Russell, I believe that was Julio Ceja, I believe it was, out in Vegas. And Magsayo got knocked down, completely dropped, but he got back up. He got back at, just like with Ryan Garcia when he got dropped. Was that Comey? I forget who it was, but he got dropped. I forget who it was, but he got dropped. Magsayo got dropped. He got back up. He's down on the cards, comes back, gets a knockout on Julio Ceja. Julio Ceja is one of those game fighters. He's there. He's in front of you. He's not going to go anywhere. And it didn't surprise me that Magsayo got dropped. Magsayo, of course, he's coming in and he's undefeated. That's signature for me with this fight with Gary Russell, because you're talking about a guy that has shown he's got the heart to come back and overcome the adversity to get a win, even when he's down on the cards. And that's why I'm leaning towards Magsayo on this, especially with the announcements from Russell. I'm not making a direct prediction. I'm saying that something tells me we may see an upset based on all the stuff that we heard from Gary Russell. So I think this one's worth to watch. And remember that Magsayo, of course, is promoted or managed, I should say managed. It's promoted, but managed really by the same team as he's like one of the Manny Pacquiao fighters. So there are stylistic similarities in that heart, right? That drive that you used to see in prime Manny Pacquiao. So that's all I got for the schedule coming up. Now let's talk about the Porterway podcast, or at least the guest on the Porterway podcast very recently, which was Keef, Once Upon a Time Thurman. And the reason I want to save this for the last is because if you didn't watch it, you should go watch it, and you should watch that first before you listen to this entry. But if you're too lazy to do that, I don't recommend it. But if you are, there were a couple highlights in Thurman's messaging. I love the format of it. I love the back and forth with everybody asking questions. And I love Keith's honesty. There were points where he talked about the Sean Porter fight. And he talked about basically how, they had a plan, and the plan was he knew that Sean was going to wane a little bit. And Sean outright admitted that one of his shortfalls has been power. And so we learned a lot in this episode. It wasn't just about Keef, it was about Sean too. We learned a lot about the stylistic differences of both fighters and the banter back and forth between them when they're in the ring. Like with Floyd and Shea Mosley, where Floyd was telling that story. We learned a lot about both fighters, and we don't get to hear that much like I think we'd like to. And that's why I think the Porterway podcast is so amazing, because you get to hear the stories of the fighters that are in there. So the next one to have, of course, would be Danny Swift. I'd love to have him on the show to hear the same kind of stories. But Keith's talking about, he's here, he's not going anywhere. He's got targets he wants to do. He understands he's been out. He's got work to do to catch up. He wants to show that he can still be in this, and he loves the sport. This is, I believe, in response to some of the narrative that has been that he's kind of lost the fire. He's lost the passion for the business, and he's not really fully in it. He talked about the Josecito fight. And anybody who watched that fight, and I believe it was round 7, in this fight, Thurman's basically doing what he needs to do. And then Josecito catches him with a shot, and Thurman gets rocked. And then Lopez goes after him, and he's just landing bombs. There's shots. I have video of that sequence. Lopez is landing bombs like I've never seen Keef ever take, ever. And he took no-look hooks from Danny Swift. He took combos from Sean. He took shots from Manny. None of them came close to what Josecito was bombing. Thurman describes it as punches straight out of Mexico. It's more than that, dude. It's like, I was watching, I'm like, Keef, what the hell's going on? Well, Keef says, something was wrong, and I just didn't want to throw back. There was something where I didn't want to throw back. And then, we finished the fight, and we got out of it, and we showed that we were a true champion. That's cool, but what lapsed? Like, we didn't really understand what lapsed. What was it? Was it emotional? Was it mental? Was it physical? What lapsed? Because, again, I have never seen Keef, Once Upon a Time Thurman, get bombed on to that degree, ever. And nobody of a higher quality of Josecito Lopez has ever come close to doing that to him. So then it creates concerns, because If we can't analyze the true reason why that lapse happened, it means it could happen again. And Mario Barrios is the kind of fighter that could do it. We don't know if he will, but he could. He's not a bum. He's a decent fighter. He just got a robbery against Akhmedov, and then he lost to Tank Davis. But this is Tank Davis we're talking about here. So I think he's still game, and we need to understand those lapses, because if we don't understand the lapse, it creates a risk that Barrios could exploit whatever that was, and then now what happens with Keef. And so I want to see him still in the game, but not on the losing end. I want to see him, like Sean said, the same guy who was there in that ring against Sean Porter, the same guy that was in there against Danny Garcia. What happened to that guy? We never really got an answer, other than I believe he fought Danny either after an injury or with an injury, and then he fought Sean after an injury. So there was injuries always around the different fights. We don't know if that's fully resolved. He says he's healthy, but what does that mean? Because if we listen to every fighter, they say you're always going in injured because of the sparring, and it's harder to drop weight. It's harder to do as you get older. It's harder to do this at the top level, and it's harder to get your body back into that groove. So I want to understand that a little bit better, and I don't think we did. So hopefully he does more interviews. He's been doing a lot of interviews and just talking about he's still here. He's single-handedly selling the fight. He's still here. He still wants to obtain a championship belt. He knows he doesn't have it. He knows that he has to work for it, but he also knows he has name recognition, which he does. And he wants to use that to propel other fighters. To me, Keith Thurman and Crawford made the best sense, but Keith himself said it's not going to be a top fighter up front. I want to get back. And Mario, the call came. Let's make this happen. And I get it. I understand it. I think it's personally a mistake. And the reason I think it's a mistake is because one possible theory I've got with this whole Josecito thing, and if Keith's listening, please, I want the smoke. One theory I've got with Josecito is maybe, just maybe, the lapse was simply because you're fighting somebody who's not on your level. And maybe in your mind, you're not turning it up because you don't think you need to until you're under fire, until you're under threat, until you're at risk. And then you turn it up. And then all of a sudden you're able to show up and box and everything. When you said against Manny Pacquiao that you fought for a draw after you got dropped, you just fought for a draw because you thought you were losing. Is that because, again, you had that same kind of lapse after you get dropped where you kind of lose a little bit of the spirit, where you're not fighting to your peak like you always should do? Go out there and, like what Sean does, he goes out there to try to win every single freaking round. When I looked at Sean against Terrence Crawford, that's what he was doing rounds 1 through 6. He was working to try to win. He was trying to go for knockouts, but ultimately he was trying to win. And I thought he was successful in that strategy. It wasn't until he backed off and allowed Crawford to get set and time the shot that all of a sudden he's getting dropped, and then his frustration set in, which was the only reason I had Porter winning that fight up through round 10 on the cards. That means that something wasn't right with the strategy, but Sean was consistent in at least his attempt to do a thing until he got frustrated. With Keef, it's like there's a lapse that doesn't make any sense, where he loses that focus to keep doing a strategy or keep adjusting. When he faces the adversity, it's the opposite. So I want to understand that. I'd like to know, because I wouldn't want to see the same thing happen with Barrios. Because from all paper bets, there's no way Barrios should have anything for Terrence or Keith Thurman. Barrios should drop, at most, he should win 4 rounds on those cards. It shouldn't even be anywhere close. But my fear is that it's going to be close, and it shouldn't be close. And if it's close, it's going to be harder for Keith to sell that he should be in there with the likes of an Errol Spence or a Keith Thurman. I'll say the same thing about Ugas. If Spence and Ugas fight, and Spence just destroys him, I don't even mean knockout. I mean just destroy Mikey Garcia style, right? Just a blowout, 12-0. Ugas is done. He'll never be able to sell that he should be at the championship level ever again at 147. He's done. That's why I don't want to see it. Unless if it was legitimate, as in Ugas is really trying. He's trying hard. He just can't do it. Just like Peterson against Spence. If that's the case, then I can give it a pass. But if it's just a dominant performance, I don't want to see that, because it means that Ugas is done. So if Keith's listening, at the end of the day, I personally felt that it should have been Thurman versus Crawford, or in this case, Crawford versus Thurman, because Crawford got the belt. I think that should have been the next fight. And the reason I think it should have been the next fight is because it would answer a lot of questions about both guys. Number one, it would answer whether Keith's really here at the top level against an opponent that's really going to test him and push him and force him into adversity, but an opponent that doesn't have the power to actually damage him like a Josecito. That doesn't mean that Crawford can't throw body shots and possibly hurt Thurman to the body with a well-timed shot, but I don't think that Thurman would allow him to get that close unless they're in the clinch, and if they're in the clinch, Thurman's going to know, and he's going to be prepared for it. He always was. The only time he's ever been rocked with a body shot is when he wasn't on the ropes and the body shot came and he wasn't expecting it. We know that's a thing with Keef, but I don't think Crawford can land that shot. I don't believe he can. I believe that Crawford would try to headhunt. I believe he eventually would try to throw body shots and he'd get knocked upstairs because Thurman's very good on the check hooks. That's my opinion. So I would have rather see that fight because it would have told us a lot. And immediately, if Thurman beats Crawford, right now you've changed the whole game. You've rolled the dice, and now Thurman's right back in the mix. And then I believe Spence calls him out immediately after because Thurman's WBO. We're after the fact. We can do only what we can do. It's still an exciting era right now, but I think that COVID has shifted some things. Sean's retirement has shifted some things. Danny leaving the division has shifted some things. We're going to have to see what 147 looks like, but I'm let's say I'm cheering for Keef, but I'm leaning towards Barrios just because of all the stuff I've heard and seen. And if Barrios pulls it out, it's going to shake up the division because it means that Barrios would have beaten one of the top fighters in the previous era at 147. And then what to see where that leaves Keef, one-time Thurman. That's all I got for you for the evening of boxing. I will check back in for next weekend's events, and next weekend going forward is where we get to the real excitement because now we're getting into guys like Eubank Jr., Thurman Barrios, Quadras and Rungvisai, Danny Jacobs' return, Amir Khan. February is stacked. February is really stacked. I'm going to love seeing that one. And then March is really stacked. So going forward, boxing is going to be really exciting. And I'm going to be wrapping up those each weekend. I'm going to be doing this again. Feel free to like, share, subscribe. I'm not going to talk about the bouncing things or point to things. You know where they are. But anytime you share or spread the word, it always helps the channel. And we always take comments. Please do put the comments. As long as you're respectful, they're not going anywhere. And we can chat boxing because that's what we do. Take care.